Hey guys, welcome to our channel, and if you're new here, my name is Lloyd and I'm a corporate lawyer in Hong Kong. So with the new year comes New Year's resolutions, and one of the most common resolutions is to lose weight and be healthier. I actually googled popular New Year's resolutions, and on pretty much every list, losing weight and being healthier were on there. This is something I think about a lot because for the longest time, I made the same New Year's resolution every single year because I desperately wanted to lose weight. For a good chunk of my life, I weighed over 310 pounds, which is like 140 kilos, and I really struggled with my weight management. So today I want to share my story and talk a bit about what I've learned in terms of New Year's resolutions or goal setting generally when it comes to weight and health. And in particular, I want to talk about how 10 years of basically struggling with my diet and struggling with my weight led me to where I am today. But before we get into all of that, there's a couple ground rules I want to lay down first. Food and nutrition can be really difficult topics to talk about, and today I don't really want to talk about what I do or do not eat. That's because everyone's dietary preferences are different, and what may work for one person might not work for another. It's definitely also becoming more mainstream for people to talk about their relationship with food, but I do think that there's a sense of individuality here, and a lot of people do run the risk of sounding like their way of eating is the only right way of eating. But just because someone saw results with a certain way of eating or a certain diet doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work for everyone. The truth of it is, everything is highly individual, and the only thing we can really do as individuals is to try and test different things and see what really works for us. So today, I just want to share my personal story with food and weight management, the struggles that I've had along the way, and how I kind of ended up where I am today, eating in a much more sustainable way for myself. So I guess my story, like many others, starts when I was a kid. I was always kind of a chubby kid growing up, but when I was really young, it didn't really bother me that much. But I remember distinctly feeling like I received a lot more negative attention for being a chubby kid when I was in middle school, which led me to feel really embarrassed, but I didn't really know what to do because I was just a kid. I was always assured by my parents that I'd hit a growth spurt or puberty would happen and all of my baby fat would sort of melt away. And truthfully, that did happen. When I was in 9th grade or so, I remember growing a lot taller that year, and all of a sudden I wasn't really chubby anymore. The thing is, that only happens for one window in your life, and you don't actually learn anything about nutrition or eating during that time. So by the time I hit senior year, when things got a lot more stressful with school and I was eating a lot more junk food, I definitely put a lot of weight on. By the time I graduated high school, I weighed almost 300 pounds. From that point on, I kind of started on a cycle of on and off diets that didn't really do much for me at all. I set goals to lose weight and get healthy, but I didn't really have the tools or know-how to do it in the right way. New Year's resolutions happened a lot too. Every January I'd say, all right, I have 6 months until the summer. That's plenty of time. I can diet sustainably. I can go to the gym and I'll look great by the time summer rolls around and I'm going to the beach with my shirt off. But the reality of the situation is that never really happened for me. Sometimes I'd start dieting in January, but I wouldn't really do it consistently, or I would sort of be like, I'll start tomorrow or I'll start next week. Pretty much every year around spring, I'd sort of realize that I hadn't really made any progress or maybe even gained weight, and I'd start to panic. I still had this idea that I wanted to get in shape by the summer, so I'd do some kind of a crash diet or something super unsustainable just because I had this vision of, if I could go to the beach with my shirt off or feel like I was fit in the summer, then I'd feel really good about myself. These crash diets weren't sustainable at all, and even though I'd see some results in the short term, I would almost definitely put all the weight back on, if not more. Now, I'll pause here to mention that I wish I could say that being overweight didn't bother me at all, and that I had a more noble reason for wanting to get in shape, like looking after my health or just wanting to be a generally more healthy person. But the truth of it is, being overweight and being what I thought was very fat bothered me a lot. I really didn't like being fat, and whether or not this was true, I always perceived myself as receiving more negative attention for being overweight. I constantly felt self-conscious and uncomfortable in my own skin. It bothered me so much that at times I would fantasize about getting a gastric bypass or even liposuction because I thought that would just make all my problems go away. So there was one notable crash diet in particular that really messed with me. I was about 22 years old at the time, and I had just joined a gym for the first time, thinking that, this was going to be my big moment where I was going to lose all this weight and feel really good about myself. This was a point when I was pretty much at my heaviest, weighing in around 310 pounds, and I set a goal for myself to try and lose 100 pounds in a year. That year, I hired a personal trainer, I put myself on a really restrictive diet, and I kind of went to the gym almost every day. And actually, that year, I did manage to lose 100 pounds in a year, which is still kind of shocking when I say it. I used to kind of wear it as a badge of honor too, and I would tell people, I lost 100 pounds in a year one time. But the truth behind it is, even though I managed to do that, once the goal was met, I didn't have anything I was working towards anymore, and I felt awful. The crash dieting and overtraining weren't healthy for me at all, and before I knew it, I was back to square one. A pretty similar thing happened when I was living in the UK doing my master's. I did a super restrictive diet where I'd basically restrict my eating for 6.5 days out of the week, and that one meal out of the week, which always landed on a Friday night, I'd be able to eat whatever I wanted in one sitting. Now, if you think that sounds like binge eating, that's exactly what it was. I had a specific goal here too. I was training with and following the diet of a friend of mine who was an amateur bodybuilder, and he was preparing for a show. So the idea was basically to follow his diet as he was leading up to the show and just seeing what kind of results it would have on me. But once again, even though I saw a lot of progress in the time that I was doing the diet, once I reached that goal of doing the diet until my friend's show, I instantly put all the weight back on because, again, I learned nothing about nutrition or how to properly feed my body. And actually, following a kind of binge eating cycle like that was really negative for my mental health. After that diet cycle, I developed what I considered to be disordered eating, in the sense that I would restrict myself massively during the day and eat only good foods, and the second that I had anything bad, I would just sort of eat everything in sight. Especially when I was in public, I cared very much about making sure that I had the perception of eating very clean and only eating good foods, but when I went home at night, I would basically binge eat. And every time I did it, I felt really guilty, and I honestly just felt horrible because I felt like I wasn't in control of my own body or my own mind, and I couldn't stop myself from doing this. On reflection, I think one of the worst parts of it was just genuinely believing that I would always be stuck in this cycle of doing these really restrictive diets and losing all this weight, and then putting it all back on because I was never really fully in control. I had heard of other people that found some kind of balance or some kind of sustainable, intuitive way of eating, but to me, that always seemed impossible. So, with all of that background out of the way, let's move to the good part. Around the time I started working full-time as a lawyer, which was around 3.5 years ago, I was again at one of those points in my life when I was very overweight. I weighed almost 300 pounds, and I was super uncomfortable in my own skin. Physically, I was really uncomfortable because I was going to work and my suits were all a bit too tight, so sitting around all day in those were really uncomfortable. But mentally, I was really uncomfortable too, because whether or not this was actually the case, I had this perception that my colleagues would be judging me based on the way I looked. It kind of felt to me like I was wearing that guilt and shame that I had experienced over the last 10 years on my body, and it was out there for everyone to see. And especially in a work context, I was really concerned that people would judge me for it. Again, I'm not saying that anyone actually felt this way, but this was the feeling that I had going into work basically every single day. But being at work had a very interesting consequence on the way that I started to look at food. I was trying some new diet things based on a podcast that I listened to that a friend sent me, and I sort of started to realize something very important. I realized that when I ate certain foods or didn't eat certain foods, I'd have more energy and feel just a lot better at work. I would experience less of a post-lunch slump, and I'd be a lot more productive with the stuff that I was doing. On the flip side, eating some foods made me feel really lethargic, tired, and my productivity just took a huge hit. As my personal time became more and more of a scarce resource due to work, I sort of started to realize that my energy levels and productivity at work were really massive priorities of mine. Being productive at work and working in an efficient manner meant that I'd have more free time after work, so it really became a top priority for me to make sure I could maximize my efficiency in the office. So, almost by accident, I started shifting my diet towards more of eating the things that made me feel good and gave me energy, rather than the things that made me feel bad and took my energy away. After I started doing this, two big things happened. Firstly, I began to change the way that I looked at food subconsciously. Rather than looking at things as being like, oh, this is a good food or this is a bad food, I began to think more in terms of what I needed to get done that day and what I wanted to do for myself to help myself. I was focused more on the effect that certain foods would have on me. So I'd think, okay, today I really need to be productive because I have a lot of work on my plate, so I'm gonna eat something that gives me energy rather than takes my energy away. But similarly, and maybe more important, when I didn't need to be so productive, I would let myself indulge a little bit more and didn't feel so guilty about it. This was really important for me because eliminating the guilt and the shame from eating more indulgent things that I used to think were bad sort of meant that I got out of this binge and restrict cycle that I'd constantly been living in. Letting myself have a bit more flexibility in this way actually meant that, kind of by accident, I found a bit of moderation in my own diet. And the second thing was, even though I still didn't like being overweight, it definitely started to matter less to me because I just felt really good all the time when I needed to feel good. It's kind of a unique form of torture when you're dealing with just tiredness and lethargy and just feeling really unmotivated at work, but you have a lot of stuff that you need to get done. By feeling like I had more control over myself in terms of when I wanted to feel more energetic or more productive, I really felt like I was back in control of my own life and I was in the driver's seat. Now, don't get me wrong, I still wanted to lose weight and get in better shape, but this was kind of balanced against my desire to just feel really good all the time. Energy and focus are seriously underrated, and I actually think that a lot of the negativity that I experienced in my own head about how I thought other people were perceiving me or how I perceived myself were really just a consequence of how horrible I may have felt all the time. And similarly, too much restriction can do the same thing. It's not just eating certain foods that make me feel horrible. Sometimes when I'm being too restrictive on myself and mentally not letting myself have a break at all was really detrimental to my mental health. So, to wrap up the story and get to the point of it all, within about a year, I did manage to lose weight, and I lost about 70 pounds. But more importantly, I never felt better about myself, and the weight never came back. So this is the first time in my life that I ever considered a diet to have actually worked. I do kind of feel now that there is a time and place for everything, and that there is some sense of moderation in my life, and I think it really helped me escape this kind of toxic mindset that I had been in for so long. By prioritizing how I feel on a day-to-day basis and allowing myself to be productive and save more time, I actually felt like I was doing myself huge favors and actually for once taking care of myself. And in that process, I still get to enjoy a lot of my favorite foods like pizza and ice cream, but just more in moderation in the sense that I only really have them when I know that I don't need to be super productive afterwards, because usually if I have those at lunch, I'm gonna need a nap after. And trust this isn't a perfect science either. There are definitely times when I have something decadent at lunch or in the middle of the day, even though I need to work after. But that's just life. Circumstances are different from day to day, and I've learned that it's totally okay to just enjoy these off-the-cuff experiences, because we enjoy the 10% while optimizing the 90%, and that's totally okay. This year, or just generally really, if you set yourself a goal or have the desire to lose some weight and get healthier, I encourage you to think about focusing on things that make you feel really good as opposed to things that you think you can or cannot eat. And a large part of this comes from being able to understand your body and getting more in tune with how foods make you feel. And there are a few really excellent ways to do this, not just one. For me, what really helped initially was doing some form of intermittent fasting. So just in case you haven't heard of intermittent fasting, it's basically a protocol where you don't ingest any calories for a certain window of time, and you only have water, tea, or coffee without milk and sugar. For me, when I first started doing this, it wasn't too intense, and I would go for maybe 13 to 15 hours per day of not ingesting any calories. Because being in a fasted state set me at more of a baseline level, I was able to discern what foods made me feel really good and which foods didn't. For example, having a massive bowl of rice or something really sugary at lunch definitely tanked my productivity and made me feel like I needed a nap after. While on the flip side, having some protein with some high quality fats definitely made me feel like my energy levels would remain high into the afternoon. Now again, I'm not saying that this is the only way, and I'm not encouraging everyone to go and do exactly the same thing as me, but I am encouraging everyone to go and try different things to see what really works for you. Another option is to go for an elimination diet that's not too extreme, like the Whole30, which basically encourages people to take things out of their diet that are typically inflammatory or typically make you feel not so great for a period of 30 days. The idea with that diet is, after the 30 days, when you start reintroducing things into your diet, you're more able to tell the effect that they have on you because there's more of a contrast. But again, bear in mind, if you have the kind of relationship with food currently that I used to have, this might not be the diet for you. In my experience, when you block off in your head certain categories of food that you consider bad, when you do end up eating those foods, there's a lot of guilt and shame that's associated with it, and I think that's what actually causes the most damage. And finally, I encourage everyone this year to think about your goals and why you're setting them, the intentions behind why you want to achieve certain things. For me, I felt like my life changed completely when I was able to free myself from this guilt and shame cycle of food and eating and crash dieting. After almost 10 years of really struggling with this, I kind of just resigned myself to the reality that this was just going to be my life and that I'd never really escape from this cycle. But looking back now, I sort of feel like it was all part of the journey, and I'm really happy where I ended up. Now, there's a lot more that I could have talked about here, and I have a lot of thoughts about goal setting and falling in love with the process rather than just setting discrete goals. But I wanted to keep this video concise because, as is usual around this time of year, I've been seeing a lot of New Year's resolutions come up, and I thought it would be good to share my experience in case it's helpful to anyone. So, as always, do let me know in the comments if there is anything I talked about in this video that you guys want to hear more about, or if a video like this is even something you guys want to see. We've been putting out a lot of content on our channel about productivity and lifestyle, and to be honest, food's a big part of that to us. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. And again, if this is something you want to see more of on our channel, please do let us know in the comments, and we'd be happy to make more.